When you look at the high-stakes game of global politics, India's neighborhood isn't just a map. It's more like a grand chessboard. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into this incredibly dynamic foreign policy, where every single move has consequences and, well, every piece is in play.
So you have to ask, right? How does a rising power like India manage this incredibly intricate game? It's a real high-wire act, juggling historic rivalries, brand new challenges, and that constant need to build and maintain alliances. So let's explore this multi-front geopolitical chess match.
All right, first up, let's turn to the Western Front. This is home to the most persistent challenge in India's foreign policy, its relationship with Pakistan. In the game here, it really begins with a resource that's fundamental to life itself: water.
For more than 60 years, the Indus Water Treaty has been the absolute bedrock of water sharing between India and Pakistan. But lately, in response to provocations like the Pahalgam terror attack, India's leadership has been thinking about a powerful new move: putting the treaty in abeyance. Now, this could dramatically alter the strategic landscape.
You know, the IWT, signed way back in 1960, is a pretty remarkable piece of diplomacy. It gives Pakistan control over the western rivers, which is about 80% of the total water. But, and this is the crucial part, it also grants India the rights to use that water for things like hydropower, just as long as the flow isn't messed with.
So here's the key point. Holding the treaty in abeyance isn't a formal cancellation. In fact, the treaty has no exit clause. But what it is a powerful form of leverage. India would no longer be obligated to share critical data about water flow. It could flush its reservoirs to clear out silt like it's done before at the Baglihar and Salal dams. Now that's a routine thing, but doing it without notifying Pakistan creates massive disruptions downstream, especially for Pakistani Punjab's main paddy crop. And when you realize over 80% of Pakistan's agriculture depends on these waters, yeah, the potential impact is huge.
And India's strategy doesn't stop with the rivers, not by a long shot. After the Pahalgam attack, the response was multi-pronged. Militarily, you had precision strikes targeting terror camps. Economically, trade and shipping links were just cut off. Diplomatically, there's a renewed push to get Pakistan back on the FATF's gray list. That's a global watch list for terror financing. And of course, there are those unresolved territorial issues, like the Sur Creek maritime boundary dispute, that add another layer of constant friction.
Okay, now let's shift our focus. We're moving to the larger, more systemic challenge on India's northern border, the rise of China. And let me tell you, this isn't just a border issue. It's a contest for influence across the entire continent.
And right here, you can see the foundation of China's power. Its economic engine is just unparalleled. We're talking about over a third of the world's gross manufacturing production. This economic might is what underpins its geopolitical ambitions and funds these massive strategic projects all across Asia.
You know, this is not a new problem. The border dispute has a long and very troubled history, from the 1950s construction in Aksai Chin to the 1962 war. But the deadly standoff in Galwan back in 2020, that was a critical shift. It led to the creation of these buffer zones, which effectively prevent Indian troops from accessing over 24 of their traditional patrol points in eastern Ladakh.
And Beijing is actively changing the facts on the ground. A new railway near the border will boost its military mobility. There's a massive dam under construction on the Brahmaputra River, which gives it control over water flows into India. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, it's funding strategic ports across the region. And it's arming India's neighbors. Get this, a staggering 81% of Pakistan's recent military hardware came from China.
Now this is where things get really interesting. A deeply spiritual matter has become a major geopolitical flashpoint. China is absolutely adamant that the next Dalai Lama must be approved by Beijing. They're using their own laws and an old Qing dynasty method to justify it. But the current Dalai Lama has set up something called the Gaden Phodrang Trust to manage the succession, basically saying the decision rests solely within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Control over the succession is seen as the key to controlling Tibet's future. And this statement from the Dalai Lama himself, it just cuts right to the heart of the issue. By saying the next incarnation should be found in the free world, he is directly challenging Beijing's claim to authority. This really sets the stage for a future crisis where you could have two competing Dalai Lamas, one recognized by the Tibetan community in exile and another appointed by China. That would create a major schism.
So faced with these immense challenges from both the West and the North, India is not just standing still. No way. It's making a counter-move,
actively crafting a strategy of partnerships to create a much more favorable balance of power. And you can see a really clear evolution in India's strategic vision here. It started back in 2015 with SAGAR, that's Security and Growth for All in the region, which was focused mostly on the Indian Ocean. A decade later, it's expanded into MAHASAGAR. Now the scoop is the entire global south, from the Indo-Pacific all the way to Africa and Latin America. The aim isn't just regional stability anymore. It's about actively promoting India-led cooperation to counterbalance China's growing influence.
Connectivity is an absolutely key piece of this strategy. Projects like this one, the Galwan Multimodal Project, are critical. It's fully financed by India, and it connects Kolkata to the Sitwe port in Myanmar by sea. Then it moves goods up the Galwan River, and finally by road into Mizoram. This gives India's landlocked northeast a vital alternative route, bypassing that strategically vulnerable and narrow Siliguri corridor, all while deepening economic ties with Southeast Asia.
And you see this proactive diplomacy happening all over the place. In Bhutan, the first ever rail links are being built. With Bangladesh, India is its largest trade partner in the region. With Nepal, they're streamlining freight movement. In the Maldives, economic ties remain strong despite political turbulence. And even further away, a new strategic partnership makes the Philippines the first ever export customer for the advanced BrahMos missile. But even with close partners, complex challenges are always there. The relationship with Sri Lanka is a perfect example. There's this long-standing and very sensitive issue over fishing rights in the Palk Strait, and it's a constant source of friction. At the center of it is Kachativu, an uninhabited island that India actually ceded to Sri Lanka in the 1974 agreement. And while that was part of a larger maritime boundary settlement, it still causes big problems for fishermen from Tamil Nadu. So, after looking at all these key relationships, the rivalries, the big systemic challenges, the partnerships, what's the overall state of play in South Asia? What's the reality on the ground?
Well, this chart reveals a pretty stark and frankly disappointing reality. Just look at these numbers. In the European Union, almost half of all trade is with other EU members. In ASEAN, it's 22%. But here in South Asia, within the SAARC bloc, intra-regional trade is a mere 7% of the total. I mean, despite being right next to each other, despite all the cultural ties, this is one of the least economically integrated regions in the entire world. And this number right here tells you why. 114%. That's the cost of trading within South Asia as a percentage of the value of the goods themselves. Think about that for a second. It's actually more expensive for South Asian countries to trade with each other than it is for them to trade with the United States, which is thousands of miles away. It's just a massive barrier to the region's potential.
To navigate this complex environment, India has long relied on a policy called De-hyphenation. Basically, it means treating countries on their own merits, not just through the lens of their rivals. It's what allows India to have independent relationships with, say, both Israel and Palestine, or both the US and Iran. For a long time, it was used to separate policy towards India from policy towards Pakistan, insisting that relations with New Delhi should stand on their own.
And this, right here, is the ultimate takeaway. The potential is just enormous. South Asia has a combined GDP of $5 trillion. It's home to a quarter of the world's population. And yet, its estimated trade potential is nearly 3 times what it is today. And the main reason for that huge gap? Geopolitical friction, especially the unresolved conflicts between India and Pakistan, which just act as a brake on prosperity for the entire region.
And that leads us to the central question, the one that's going to define the future of this entire region. With so much economic potential just sitting there, being left on the table, will the practical need for growth and development finally become a strong enough force to overcome decades of rivalry and mistrust?
The chess match goes on. India makes its moves, China makes its counter moves, and all the smaller nations try to navigate the space in between. The board is constantly changing. And on that thought, we'll end this explainer, leaving you to wonder who will ultimately be the one to write the next chapter for this incredibly complex and vital part of the world.